Okay, hello, and welcome to our YA Summer Scares panel. I'm Kendare Blake, YA author and this year's 2025 Summer Scares spokesperson. We are going to have a lot of fun talking about horror and some really great horror reads during this hour. But before we do, we've got to go over some housekeeping. So please pardon me while I look just over your shoulder and read over these technical details. Links to Summer Scares resources and information about the program were included in the reminder email you received from Zoom about 1 hour ago. To download them, open the email, scroll to the bottom, and click on the links located there. You can also download them by copying the URLs on this screen into your web browser. If you have any trouble, please contact Booklist at webinars@booklistonline.com. The audience is in listen-only mode, but we welcome any questions. On the bottom of your screen, you'll see a toolbar, and there's a section there for Q&A. If you have a question or need technical assistance, simply click the Q&A and type your message into the box that appears. Booklist will respond to all technical related questions, and we will do our best to get to as many of your questions as the panel as we can during our conversation. If I could just add one small request, if you have just like a comment, could you leave it to the chat and like reserve the Q&A box just for panel questions that you want to have answered? That way I don't get flustered at the end and have to like scroll up and miss some stuff that you want. Okay. Booklist offers closed captioning on all webinars. To enable or disable them on your screen, please look for and click the Show Captions icon on the toolbar mentioned earlier. If you choose to enable subtitles, you can adjust the size of them at any time by selecting caption settings. And finally, Booklist expects all participants to maintain an atmosphere of respect and fairness. Anyone who violates the standard of behavior, including engaging in any form of harassment, may, at the discretion of the organizers, be immediately removed. Okay, we would like to start today's webinar with a brief introduction about the Summer Scares program. For those of you unfamiliar, the Summer Scares reading list includes titles selected by a panel of authors and librarians and is designed to promote horror as a great reading option for all ages, not just in October, but any time of the year. The program is designed by the Horror Writers Association, the HWA, in partnership with iREAD, Book Riot, NoveList, and Booklist. As I mentioned earlier, we sent a link to the 2025 Summer Scares programming guide in the reminder email, but feel free to ask for that in the Q&A box if you can't locate it. We're happy to share it with you, and you're going to want it. There are so many good ideas about programming and just so many fun tidbits. It's a really great program. All right. And that is it. Let's get to the reason why we're actually here today, which is our Summer Scares YA panel. Today we have the pleasure of hearing from Emma Berquist, author of Devils Unto Dust from Green Willow, Lamar Giles, author of The Getaway from Scholastic Press, and Kristen Simmons, author of Find Him Where You Left Him Dead from Torteen. We're going to do a brief introduction from each author and let them introduce and talk to us a little bit about their book, and then we're going to move to the Q&A portion. So we're going to start with Emma Berquist, author of Devils Unto Dust. Could you tell us a little bit about your book?
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. I'm Emma, coming to you live from Texas. And yeah, my book is Devils Unto Dust. It's a horror Western. It takes place in West Texas during Reconstruction after a pandemic has swept the American South. And it's a rabies-like virus that turns people into what are called shakes, based on the way that the fever makes them act. And so everyone lives in these sort of small walled off cities. And the only way to traverse the terrain is to hire what are called shake hunters to help you get from one place to another, but they're not very trustworthy. And so our story follows Willie, who is going from her small town of Glory, Texas, looking for her father, and she has to hire these shake hunters to go with her across the desert to try and find him so she can get money back that he stole and take care of her siblings. And that's the basic premise. And yeah, so I'd say it's like a zombie Western. And so if you like things like Westerns or alternate history, it's a fun read.
Sorry, I was having a hard time unmuting myself just now. Thank you, Emma. That's fantastic. Willie is such an amazing character. We're going to be talking more about her in just a little bit. Um, Now we'll hear from Lamar Giles, author of The Getaway. Can you tell us a little about your book, Lamar?
Absolutely. First of all, thank you all for having me and coming out today. I'm Lamar. I wrote The Getaway, which is the story of a boy named Jay Butler who lives and works at a big fancy vacation resort called Karloff Country. The thing that's special about Karloff Country is you have to have a lot of money to go there, and it has very high walls around it because outside the walls, the world is terrible. It's in the near future where it's hard to get food, medicine, and money. But if you can live in Karloff Country or vacation there, you're probably doing okay, right up until the point that some diabolical billionaires pretty much construct society's collapse. When that happens, they flee to Karloff country and reveal its true purpose, which is that of a luxury doomsday bunker. And at that point, Jay, his family, and his friends are meant to serve them five-star service through their self-made apocalypse. And the situation declines from there. I describe it as a day one dystopia. The themes of billionaires collapsing society, kind of far fetched, but I feel like we all as fiction writers can handle that. And hopefully we get a chance to talk about it a little more in a few minutes.
Lamar, I don't even know what to say about this book right now. It's like art imitates life, imitates art. Yay. Okay, but we're definitely going to talk about that a little bit more in the coming hour. And finally, last but not least, we have Kristen Simmons, author of Find Him Where You Left Him Dead. Kristen, take it away.
Hello, hello. Thank you so much. I agree with you, Kendare. I was kind of listening to that like, oh my gosh. Yes, I am author of Find Him Where You Left Him Dead. And here's my pitch. 5 kids go into a cave, but only 4 come out. And now, years later, that missing kid is back. And he says, you can find me, but you have to play the game you started years ago. So they go back into the cave, they go back into the game, and they get sucked into this place called Miedo, which is the Japanese underworld. And it's a game that is run by none other than Izanami, the goddess of death in Japanese culture. It's a game that's filled with yokai, which are Japanese ghosts, spirits, demons kind of things, oni, which are Japanese demon goblin kind of things, and all sorts of very, very dangerous creatures of Japanese mythology. It was a pure delight to write and very scary. And so I'm really glad and grateful to be here today talking about it. And excited to say that the sequel to it, it's a duology, the sequel to it just came out this week. So it's now a completed duology.
Yes, congratulations.
Thank
Congratulations
you.
on, yeah, that's such a beautiful, it's a beautiful set of covers. I encourage everyone to read the first book and then complete their set, because who likes to leave things undone? All right, now we're gonna move to the panel portion of the webinar. So if everyone could please like turn on your videos so we can see the faces, and feel free to unmute yourselves. I'm having a hard time. My mouse is not, there we go. My mouse is not clicking on the area that I wanted to click on. Well, first of all, congratulations everyone on being named to this year's 2025 Summer Scares list. It's a really cool thing to do, thing to be involved in, spreading the love of horror for readers of all ages at our libraries across the country. But I mean, I kind of really want to talk to you guys about horror today. I love talking to other horror writers because I think people expect us to be very murderous and morose, but in my experience, we hide it well. So I would just like to ask each of you, what brought you to horror? Like, what pulls you towards this particular genre and, makes you creative about it? Do we want to start with Lamar?
Sure. I would say I was indoctrinated at a very young age by my big cousins. My mom was a factory worker who had to often work these really odd hour shifts, and I would end up in my grandma's house where my cousins were. And my big cousins controlled the TV. They loved horror and they didn't care that I was 6 years old. And so they showed me absolutely everything you could imagine as being the wrong thing to show a 6-year-old in the 80s. So everything from Nightmare on Elm Street to Psycho to all the Stephen King adaptations up to that time. And I just grew to love it. It leaked into my reading, into the vernacular books, into some of the more horrific choose your own adventure books until I was one of those 10-year-olds reading Stephen King. And I've just hung in there ever since.
That's fantastic. Do you have a particular memory of being a young child and seeing maybe like one scene of a movie that stuck out to you where you were like, I don't think I should be watching this part?
Yes, a Nightmare on Elm Street, the first one, the Johnny Depp blood geyser. I can remember seeing that, and it was daytime when I watched it, but I remember it being like 1 o'clock in the morning, and I'm just in my bed staring at the ceiling, like just terrified to go to sleep. That was the moment, and
At
I've
any
been here ever
moment,
since. Yeah,
at any moment, you could have turned into a blood geyser.
I could have turned into a
That,
blood geyser.
dangerous, dangerous. I was also indoctrinated into the Nightmare on Elm Street very young, so relate. Emma, what about you?
So I had a lot of anxiety when I was a kid. I mean, I still do, but I used to too. So, I was really, I don't want to say like obsessed with death, but I thought about death a lot. It was just something always in the back of my mind. And I read a lot as a kid, and I was always sort of interested in these darker themes. And I think for me, horror was a way to sort of manage my anxiety because it was a contained fear. Like I knew that there was a beginning and an end to it. So it's like if you watch a scary movie, you know that it's going to end at some point, or if you are reading a scary book, there's going to be a conclusion. And so for me, it sort of became a way to like manage my fears and anxieties. And then I just really grew to love it. And I think it really is an important way for us to like explore our fears and the things that we are all, worried about. And you can kind of see, even when you look at like horror movies over the decades, what society was anxious about or worried about at that time. I think horror is a really good reflection of like our, societal fears.
Yeah, yeah. Horror really gives us a chance to like work things out.
Yeah, it's very cathartic.
Yeah, you work it out on the page and then we don't have to kill anyone in real life. It's great. It works
It's
really
cheaper
well.
than therapy.
Yeah, yeah. What do you think, Kristen?
Yes, I actually totally agree with that. I feel like I am a person who scares very easily. So I think I'm kind of in touch with that emotion, and I also laugh very easily and really enjoy things that are funny. And I think there's a really fine line between horror and humor. And I I don't know, I like to walk that line a little bit, but I do feel like just knowing that sensation of being scared and being afraid of being afraid, if that makes sense, that anxiety of being afraid has driven a lot of my writing in horror. I also feel like what you were saying, Emma and Kendara, is that a lot of this book came really directly out of the COVID time, right? And everything happening in lockdown, and all of a sudden, like the world had changed in this vast way. And I feel like fiction is always a lens in which authors see the world, and all of a sudden, everything that I was writing became darker and darker because the world was getting darker and darker. And when I write scary things, it kind of felt more natural to write like very resilient and radical hope as a part of that. So while the setting and the story and the plot itself is quite dark in this book, the characters that are in it seem to almost be more resilient and more hopeful as a way to get through that. And I think that was something, yeah, that came directly out of that really scary time in 2020 of like, how are we going to get through this? What is this thing that we've now been thrust into? How do we survive? Who do we lean on? Who can we trust? All of that kind of pulled together to make Find Him Where You Left Him Dead.
That leads kind of directly into one of the things that I want to talk with you all about, which are your characters. So
Yeah.
fabulously drawn. Although, Kristen, I do want to ask you one quick lightning round. What was your favorite horror movie as a kid?
Oh my gosh, like I'm terrified of horror movies, and I did also like Lamar, I had cousins that kind of pulled me into it and made me watch things that I shouldn't have been watching. I can't tell you what my favorite one as a kid was, but I can tell you that I had the same thing laying in bed staring at the ceiling. Um was from the original Pet Cemetery. There's a scene where someone's walking into a car and there's like an Achilles there's, somebody's Achilles is involved. And I will say, like, I couldn't step anywhere where I couldn't see what was lurking below me for probably years. I was terrified of that scenario happening to me. Awful, awful, awful.
Yes. Oh my gosh. I absolutely love. Do either Emma or Lamar, do you guys have any weird horror phobias? Like when I let leak over into your present day, when I go to a hotel room, I'll still check under the bed.
Uh-huh.
I don't know why, but I read once that somebody found a body under there at one point. So every time now I'm like, is there actually like an underbed? And if there is, I'm gonna have to get down there and just make sure there's nothing dead. Do you have any of that? Like,
I have
Well,
things about fingernails, like any kind of like pulling off of fingernails or like any kind like they're like even like in Black Swan, it's not even like really a horror movie, but when she pulls on her hangnail and it rips off this huge piece, like that gives me that like full body like
body horror, body,
Mhm.
which
Body horror.
you do well with the shakes and
Yeah,
Devils
I love it. I hate it
there's-
and I love it. So
Yeah, there's some good gross moments there.
in my house, this is very specific. It's just a certain character whose name we do not say, even though the ritual doesn't trigger unless you say it in a mirror 5 times. Like even to the point where the great actor Tony Todd passed last year. We showed we honored him, but we still don't say that name.
Don't say it. That's just smart, I think. That's
Don't
just
risk it.
reasonable cautions. Um, all right, well, let's shift track a little bit to talking a little bit more specifically about your books. And let's talk about characters in horror novels. A horror can have a really great, scary premise, but if you really want to hook people, it's the human element that does that for us. So you have to have a core of really great characters anchoring the thing, giving us somebody to root for. So could each of you talk about what you found most compelling about your characters and how you approach them? You each have a kind of a different set of characters that were following along in these really hard to survive situations.
Well, I think when Kristen was mentioning like the kind of anxiety we had coming out of the pandemic, a lot of that is in the getaway. And with the character Jay, particularly, I was thinking a lot about lockdown. At the time, my wife was pregnant with our first child, and the idea of like, how bad could things get? And in a horrible situation, what could I be capable of or willing to overlook in order to protect my family? And that's something I tried to build into Jay's character because when things go bad, he's essentially the billionaire apologist. He makes a lot of excuses. He's the super fan of the Karloff family. But within his crew are people all along the spectrum. There's a person who is absolutely against the rich people. There's a person who is part of that class. There's sort of a person who's a little bit moderate, and she vanishes very early in the book, which causes all kinds of chaos. So I tried to play with the scenarios that we were all seeing at the time, like who's who and who would tolerate what and who would do what to others.
I really felt reading that one, that I was just kind of staring in the face of the best and the worst of human nature. But you did a really nice job with each of those characters, kind of like you said, having them stand in as archetypical representations of different types of people and how we would react in those situations. I also just really found that you did a really beautiful job of making them seem like a bonded group. Like you totally bought into their friendship from page one. You could feel their history on the page. You could understand why this particular group of kids kind of, chose to hang together. So that was just, I don't have a question about that. I really enjoyed it.
Well, thank you.
Emma, could you tell us a little bit about Willie and her family and the two kind of semi-hunky grizzled hunters that she recruits to help her out?
So Willie, Willie's one of those people who had a lot of responsibility thrust on her at a young age. And it's really sort of made her into who she is. She lost her mom to this disease. her dad is just not there. He's, he's an alcoholic and he's off gambling money. And so she's had to raise her siblings. And as a result of that, like she's very strong, she's very independent, but she also doesn't really allow herself to feel a lot of emotions a lot of the time because she can't really afford to be emotional or to be vulnerable. And so that's kind of the flaw in her character, is that she has to sort of learn how to deal with her emotions along the way. And part of that is meeting these two brothers who have sort of a more equal relationship, because Willie's sort of a parent to her siblings, and these brothers are actual siblings. And kind of her just seeing that there are ways to exist in the world that are not quite so depressing. And yeah, I mean, she was a lot of fun to write. She's a tough character to write because she is really tough and she is very closed off. But hopefully she got some vulnerability in there by the end.
Yeah, well, I mean, her given name is Daisy,
Yeah,
right?
she
And
won't go
she's
by
like,
Daisy.
abso-freaking-lutely not. Like, you will not call me that. That doesn't belong in this universe.
Yeah.
And that kind of just sets it out, it gives us an instant insight into the kind of person that she is. Over the
Yeah.
course of the novel, she strikes out on her own with these two hunters into very dangerous territory, to try to find her missing father who has done them wrong. Like, he's a real ne'er-do-well. Um, and it was really nice to watch her, because like you said, she has all this stuff put on her, and
Mhm.
she's basically an adult. She's living as
Yeah.
an adult
Yeah.
with all the responsibilities of an adult. But it's on the journey that you really get to see her kind of regress and become more of a teenager and have some
Mhm.
actual,
Yeah,
thoughts
she's
about
she's
herself.
allowed to finally let other people in and like have them take some of the responsibility off her, because she really doesn't trust anybody other than, like maybe her little brother, who again, but he's a kid. And so her learning to actually trust people, and especially to trust hunters who, just by and large, nobody in this society trusts them. It's a big step for her.
Yeah, yeah, excellent. Well, yeah. This book is just really compelling. I mean, all of your books really keep the pages turning. Kristen, could you talk a little bit about your gang of friends? I have to admit, this gang of friends, they start off in a pretty rough patch. I mean, they've left one of themselves to die. I mean, they don't remember it, but that's a hard thing to come to terms with and still be friends at the end of the day. Can you talk a little bit about their development and
Yeah.
any particular character who stood out to you?
Yeah. I love them all. So what was really fun and interesting in this book is to be able to work with characters at a very young age and then at an older age. So seeing them essentially at two different points in their lives and um, being able to process on page how they've changed as a result of something terrible that's happened. So my background prior to being a writer full-time is as a therapist, and specifically as a trauma therapist with soldiers who've been through war trauma. And so something that I am really fascinated by and interested in is post-traumatic stress disorder and trauma reactions in general. And that was something that I got to work with a lot in this book, because you have these kids that are youngish, that go in to just mess around and kind of get in trouble together, as kids do, and something terrible happens to all of them. And it's so traumatic, that it makes all of their personalities and traits just kind of do a 180. So, at a younger age, I have a girl who's kind of the ringleader. She's the wild one. She's the one that's going to be saying, you don't have to tell your parents, we'll be back quick enough, right? Like, don't worry about it. All of a sudden, as a result of this, the world is no longer safe. Nothing can be trusted. I have to cling to my rules. I have to follow the straight line. If I ever step out of it, something terrible will happen again. So she's gone from one side to the complete other. I have a girl who was almost the opposite of that, who was so interested in education and facts and figures and things that you could cling to, that now, as a result of this trauma, realizes that nothing matters. You can't trust anything in the world. So she's dropped out of school. She's clinging to her video games and her fantasy worlds because, why not? Why not? Nothing matters anymore. And then I have two male characters who also just have gone 180s because of this terrible thing that's happened. So it was such an interesting journey to go on, to see these innocent, wonderful children just really affected in this terrible way. And then on top of that, to have them learn that if they come together the way they used to be, if they grab onto those traits that they used to have, they might be able to not only rescue the friend that they left for dead years ago, but like survive the night. So they have to kind of dig deep and find the people that they were prior to trauma, which can be like a real hard exercise, obviously. So it was incredibly gratifying for me to go on this kind of therapeutic journey with all of them. And it's a rotating point of view story. So they all have points of view um, in this book, which was fun also, just to like be in their heads when all the stuff's going down.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, when you're dealing with like Kristen's book is basically, kids fall into a game, like they fall into a deadly game. So when I was reading it for the first time, it was impossible for me not to picture the old Jumanji movie, like the
Yes.
first one with Robin Williams, and just when he shows up as an adult, just like screaming in terror from
Yes.
being stuck in the jungle for, like 30 years. I'm like, yeah, yeah, these poor kids, they've got to find their way, they really have to work it out
Yeah.
and cleave to each other. I love that trope about you're really good friends when you're young, something happens, it breaks you apart, and then you have to find your way back to each other. I don't know. I just love that. Maybe it's the Stephen King reader in me, but I've always really, really enjoyed when a group of friends has to go through that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Emma, I've mentioned this before, but the historical setting of Devils into Dust is just so well done, and it feels very lived in, and it's so gritty, and so like peppered with really fun survival frontier horror details. So were there any particular elements in your historical research that sparked your interest? Like you mentioned that the shakes were kind of inspired by rabies,
Hmm.
which we know was rampant back there and there were
Yeah.
no treatments. But what should we be like most afraid of if some day the world just regresses into a old west frontier?
Probably sepsis. Like that's probably the number one. Yeah, without like antibiotics, we're kind of screwed. Like any wound is gonna get septic. That's why they would cut off a lot of limbs. It's like, well, but yeah, no, I did a lot of reading. I'm just really interested in the time period. I especially love Reconstruction. And so I read a lot of like Eric Foner, a historian that I love. And yeah, just a lot of I read like True Grit, and just sort of a lot of books about the Old West, and I'm a big Cormac McCarthy fan. I love a lot of like Western stuff and that sort of gritty um cowboy stuff. I grew up in Texas. Like we love cowboy stuff here and just everywhere.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
I think
it's fun. I've got boots.
yeah. I love like the frontier stuff. You grew up watching like reruns of Little House on the Prairie, and you just love anytime anybody has to put on a bonnet. It's just a good time. I have a friend who actually carries a bonnet around in her purse,
Sure.
just in case. You
As
never
one
know when
does.
the bonnet occasion will arise. So yeah, just excellent job on that. Lamar, I have to ask you about your setting and about your entire. So as the expert author of The Getaway, what do you feel are the chances of Getaway happening to us in real life now? Like, are the odds just like steadily rising? Who will come out on top? Can you give us an over under?
Well, I don't want to spoil anything in the book, so I want to point readers that way. But what I'll say is, so far, the only thing I've really gotten wrong is Bronny James being a really great NBA player. Otherwise, a lot of the things in the book are coming to pass. I didn't want to be that prescient, but
Oh
it's
man.
happening.
Yeah,
Uh, all jokes
it's
aside, I don't think it'll get. I I don't think. I hope it doesn't get as bad as it gets by the finale of the book. But the thing is, all of that stuff came from either things that had already happened or logical extrapolations on things I saw happening And I mean, it's like I'm not like super smart. I don't have any powers to tell the future, but it's just we've been here before, or someone in the world has been here before. And combine that with some experience I had working at a very famous luxury resort in Orlando, Florida, that I don't name,
Hmm.
but they have a mouse problem. Um, it made for a good story that I wish wasn't really a snapshot of a lot of stuff we're seeing now.
It's a really good story. I think readers are really going to gravitate towards it. I also feel like it's just an important thing for people to be reading right now. Why do you think, and this is kind of a question for all of you, but why do you think that horror is important for people as a functioning society to continue to look toward? Like, why do you think it's important for young people to have access to horror in their reading choices?
I think personally, and this is the way I felt when I was young and reading horror, that in a lot of ways it allowed you to test drive scenarios and sort of see the ways people can get in and out of very horrific situations. Sometimes it doesn't end that well. Sometimes it does. But at the end of the day, you can close the book or cut the movie off and think on it. It gives you a lot of what ifs to deal with, and in some ways, maybe helps improve your chances of dealing with the small horrific things in your own life.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's really important for people to know that they can survive really awful things. And I mean we see things on on the news, but when you are in a book, you have a, you know, a much closer connection with the character, with the story. And I think it's important for people to know that, like, no matter what happens, there are, of course, horrific things in the world, but you can survive them. You can make it through, and you can be stronger for that.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think it's just that kind of radical hope that I was talking about, that the darker things get, the stronger and more tenacious you need to be in order to survive. And I feel like a lot of people, especially young people, feel a lot of pressure to survive in a world that feels very ugly and oppressive sometimes. And how do you get through that? Do you kind of follow the lead of some of these characters of your favorite books?
Yeah.
You have to fight.
Yeah. Um, I just want to take a quick moment to remind our listeners today and our audience that if you have a question, we're going to be approaching the Q&A portion of our webinar soon. So feel free to pop them down in that Q&A box. I see we've got some really good questions in there already, and we will try to get to as many as we possibly can before the end of the hour. I'm fairly certain that I can say this, and you'll have similar experiences. But as a writer of horror for young people, I've had so many teachers, so many librarians, so many of the students themselves tell me that horror is like the best genre for nailing down those reluctant readers, for hooking in those kids that just haven't really been enthusiastic about putting their nose into a story. Um, have you had any cool interactions with young people or teachers or librarians? Just any cool stories, anecdotes about like how a horror book has really turned a reader on to a different path?
Well, I was in Poughkeepsie a few weeks back and got to meet a really cool group of kids who had read The Getaway. And one young man who was helping me get around the school. I mean, he just told me flat out. He was like, "Sir, I'm gonna be honest with you. The first 20 pages, thought this book was trash." And he's like, "Where is it going? These characters are empty." I mean, he's just really just giving it to me, and I'm just like, wait. But he was like, "But sir, honestly, I got to tell you, blew through the rest of it, loved it, and I just want to really read anything that talks about the future. Really like these books that kind of give you ideas of how things can go." And so that was cool because I mean that's part of the intent. I mean I didn't want him to suffer through the first 20 pages the way he did. I hope that's not the case for everyone else, but that's the sort of reaction I would like. Like, I wasn't into it until I was, and I thank you for that. I appreciate that.
Yeah, I love youthful readers. They can see through BS a mile away, and they will tell you exactly how they see it. And I love that. I love that about them. Yeah, that's really cool. I mean, these books, they can reveal to somebody who thought that they didn't like reading that, oh no, I've just been reading the wrong stuff. Like I like reading stories about things that, excite my brain. So that's really great. Kristen, if I can put you on the spot for a moment, Find Him Where You Left Him Dead draws on the mythology of the Japanese underworld. You've mentioned some of the very particular creepy elements that it contains, the tests, the games that the kids have to go through. But I was wondering if there was any one in particular that you were excited about getting in there, or is there any particular spooky story about them that you remember your relatives terrorizing you with as a child?
I was a very uncomfortable person to have at sleepovers. Maybe don't invite Kristen Simmons next time. No, I heard a lot of these stories growing up, and it's really interesting because yokai in Japanese culture are not always scary stories, right? Like so we think of them a lot as being like, ooh, ghost story kind of stuff. And some of them are very frightening. Some of them are actually just like the spirits that exist around us, right? So a lot of Japanese Shinto culture is based in kami, which is just like these spirits that exist around us that are part of the earth, that are part of the natural world, and we are surrounded by them at all times, right? And yokai is kind of branched off from that, which is a very cool idea that like we're constantly sharing this world with other creatures, some of them good, some of them evil, some of them just with us all the time, right? So a lot of these stories I heard were just like, yeah, there's a yokai that lives in the field behind the house and he rings the bell at 6 o'clock. That's his job. That's what he does. It's kind of like, yeah, he's there. I always loved the story of the filth licker, who is literally a yokai that sits behind your toilet and just licks the floor. And now that I'm older, I'm like, I would pay money for someone to just clean the floor behind the toilet every day. I will take that yokai. But my favorite one to put into this story is actually a scarier story, and it's the story of Kuchisaki Onna, who in my book is actually Kuchisaki. So Kuchisaki Onna would be a woman in the original tale, but Kuchisaki is I don't know how much I can say on this, but I'll go and cut me off if it gets too much. But Kuchisaki wears a mask, like a COVID mask, and walks around. See, there's a lot of COVID references here I'm seeing now, but walks around in bathrooms and says, am I beautiful? Am I pretty to people that they see? And if you say yes, then they take off their mask and show you the smile that's cut from ear to ear. So, just cut, cut, cut. And you're so scared that you immediately die of fear. And if you say no, no, I'm sorry. If you say no, they show you the smile. If you say yes, they also show you the smile, but then you get cut from ear to ear. So it's kind of a no-win situation.
Yeah.
But anyway, I had such a delightful time working that psychopath into my book and made him even bigger in book 2 because he was just so much fun to write because like, what is that? Who does that? Right? Like that is a wild thing to want to do to people on a regular basis in a bathroom. So
I must say,
that was the
yeah,
person I wanted to work in the most.
this excites me hearing that about book 2 because that was my favorite as well.
Yes.
Just
Kuchisaki is a very
wonderful.
earnest, very loving psychopath that just wants to see people bleed.
Okay, so I see that our Q&A box has exploded, which is wonderful. Let's take some audience questions if you guys are ready for that. Okay, so Sarah Iraheta, I apologize if I mispronounced that, asks, was there an element or scene that scared you or left you unsettled while you were writing your books? Was it on purpose or did it surprise you? And then she says she's looking forward to reading these.
In The Getaway, those who've read it will recognize this scene. I'm not going to say too much about it, but it happens at a water park. And that particular scene was super tough for me to write. And I mean, I guess the question is, was it on purpose? It was, and it didn't surprise me because that's one of the things that's based on actual American history, horrible things that have happened in towns when a group of people get together and seek retribution. And so it really did disturb me, but I felt it was very important to put it in there.
So like I said, I love body horror. So there's a scene with an infected wound, and that was the one that I probably like spent the most time on and like upset me the most. Um, and just like having to describe like the colors and consistencies of things. But you know, that's a good time.
I agree that I love body horror, and I'll get back to my book, but I have to say I'm rewatching The Handmaid's Tale now because there's a new season coming out, and I'm at the part where they're in the colonies or whatever, and she's washing her hands and the fingernails fall off, and she reaches in like just pulls out a tooth, and I'm like, whoa. That kind of pushes me over the edge. But yes, there were definitely scenes that scared me in my book. And actually, the one that scared me the most was the first scene of the book where she's at a my character Madeline is at a swimming pool and is jumping in, and there's something that gets out of the water at the other side, and she doesn't quite know what it is. And um, I think there's a scene like that in Swim Fan that came out in the 90s that really terrified me. So anyway, that kind of calls on that.
All right. Cole Spofford asks for everyone, are there any horror tropes or monsters that you would like to write about in the future?
So that's one of the cool things about yokai is there's so many of them. And so in a lot of Western cultures, ghosts are kind of just generally described, but in Eastern cultures and in Japanese culture, yokai are very specific. So there's just these encyclopedias of hundreds of yokai, thousands of yokai, and where each one was cited and what they do and what their name is and you know what the last human interaction was and all these things. So I think there's just so many different ways to bring yokai in, different kind of yokai in. So I'm really excited to grab some of those other yokai that I haven't worked with and move them into other works.
I wouldn't mind taking a crack at a slasher at some point. Love slasher films. It'll probably be a while just because I think a lot of authors have done that recently and have done it very well. So I would need to have like a take that I feel like is really original, something that's not duplicating what we've seen in the last few years. And if I ever get that idea, I will do it. But in the meantime, I'm really happy to be able to read and see so many great takes on the slasher trope.
I've always wanted to do something involving exorcisms. I haven't quite figured out how to do that yet. And then I'm also really interested in like parasites and infestations, just, you know, as a hobby. I like
Yeah, as a
learning about
hobby.
bugs. So
Why not?
something like that I think would be really fun.
Let me see. I just saw this. Um, this kind of leads into this question, so we'll go with this one next. Michelle Glatt asks, will you please share what you're writing now? And how soon will we be able to pre-order?
So I've swerved a little bit from horror. Right now, I'm wrapping up a Star Wars novel. It's called Sanctuary. It's a Bad Batch novel for those who know the Bad Batch. That'll be out August 5th. So you can pre-order from like the Penguin Random House site or StarWars.com.
Very cool.
I'm working on something more adult right now, and it's sort of more leaning into the body horror uh, aspect of what I do. So it's not quite finished yet, but you know, we'll get there at some point.
Excellent. Oh, Kristen?
I also am veering out a little bit. I have an adult fantasy that's coming up in 2027, actually, that is about my sort of a retelling of my great grandmother's time in an internment camp in World War II, Japanese internment camp. But it's retold with a lot of Japanese mythology in it. So instead of seeing, the walls of the internment camp on Sand Island, she's entering an actual sand castle, things like that. Kind of the imagery spread throughout the whole thing, and I'm pretty excited about it.
Yeah, yeah. That's a nice thing kind of about writing for young adults. And, I think they let us kind of hop around from genre to genre a little bit more deftly and easily than, say, the adult writers that I've spoken to who are asked to, like carve out a niche for themselves. But we can kind of like spread our wings. So I'm very excited about all of these projects coming out from you. Um, Aaliyah Estes asks, are there any books you can suggest for those teens who are branching out from middle grade fiction that would be a good introduction to the horror genre?
Well, I always like to recommend Tiffany D. Jackson's The Weight of Blood. First of all, Tiffany's fantastic, and The Weight of Blood is a retelling of Stephen King's Carrie. So I scream from the rooftops like Tiffany did a great job with that book. That would be my recommendation for someone who's looking to go from middle grade horror to the next level. I don't think you, but she has a bunch of other books you can look at too. White Smoke, allegedly, um, but that's the one I always throw out there.
Good one. Anybody else? I know it can be hard to think of whenever I'm asked for like recommendations on the fly, my mind just immediately blanks.
Yeah.
I mean, I think Anna Dressed in Blood would be a great
I was gonna say Anna
entry,
Dressed
yeah.
in Blood is a great one. Agreed.
Thank you. I'm sure it's just because my face and the poster is right behind it. And you
I
just
was
can't,
like, oh, I love that book. Yeah.
just blatant product placement. Anything else?
I also like Natalie Richards. I think that she kind of walks that line of horror and thriller, and a lot of young adult stuff. And I think the most recent is 49 miles, 49 miles, something like that. There's a lot of numbers in her titles, and yeah, they're very like quick-paced thrillers with some very scary elements. So I think that it's kind of a good gateway sometimes.
Okay, so Jill Henson has a question for everyone, but she does mention that it was listening to the audio of the Getaway that got her thinking this. How easy or difficult is it to stay sane while you're writing horror? Do you ever write something that scares you and lingers in your mind and makes you like look over your shoulder or give you a hard time sleeping at night?
Well, with the getaway, I had a rough time with a lot of it, particularly towards the end. I mean, and when I say I had a rough time, like literally the day I turned in the draft that would go to copy edits, like as soon as I hit send, I told my wife, I think I need to go to the hospital. I felt like I was having some sort of attack, which was ended up being like an anxiety attack. But I still forced my way to meet the deadline, which is not anything I recommend someone do to meet a deadline. But just the themes of that book were very rough, and I ended up writing another horror novel after it. But I'm purposely getting away from horror for a couple of projects just to give myself a break, because even if I don't write it as dark on the page as I feel it, I still feel it.
Um, Caitlin Griffith Miller asks, what advice would all of you give to a teen or a young adult interested in writing some horror books?
I mean, the advice that I always give is just read. That's how you learn how to write, is just by reading in your genre, reading outside your genre, just read really widely, figure out what it is about the books that you love that makes them work. That's how you learn how to break things down and how to put a book together is just by reading a bunch of them and figuring out the beats.
And I would say write very specifically about what scares you. Don't try to get into, I think this is a thing that a lot of people are scared of. Like, I think you'd be surprised that when you get into the specificity of the things that scare you, you'll find that they tend to be more universal than you think.
Yeah, I agree. Think about the things that you're afraid of and try to access those feelings of anxiety and fear. And in addition to reading a lot, I think writing a lot is really important. I always tell young writers to just like keep doing it, keep doing it, keep doing it. I feel like a lot of people start and stop because they get discouraged for whatever reason, or they're hitting a wall, or it's not progressing the way they want to. But it like anything else, it takes practice, right? You don't go out on your first day and run a marathon. You have to continue to practice and practice and practice, and that's how those pages get built, not on a single sit down session.
There's a question here from Flannery Crump, who is asking about kind of like walking the line of dealing with heavy topics, racism, classism, violence, as far as it goes for writing for teens. And I am curious, I would like to know, do any of you guys have like rules, or have you come up against something in your writing with it in mind that you're writing for a young adult audience? Like, where do you draw the line before it gets too dark, too real, too gory, too anything? Is that ever something you consider?
I think my natural tendency is to kind of cut off things at the point where I think the imagination can take over. So mostly I think I do a decent job of not putting too much to the point that maybe a reader may not be able to handle it, with the exception of things that are based in real historical situations, like, for example, lynchings. When I write about that, I don't necessarily pull back because I'm always reminded that there were people who would take their children to watch these horrible things happen to other people. And in that regard, I think I owe the dead the honor of depicting it accurately. But beyond that, I try to just cut things off because I think your imagination or the reader's imagination would do much more than I could ever do.
Yeah, I'd say with the exception of like a hardcore sex scene, like teens can handle a lot more than people give them credit for. And I think one way that like they're really good bullshit detectors. And I think if you're condescending to a teenager, like they know immediately and they're gonna lose respect for the work and the writing. So I think like just treat them with the respect that you would have for any reader.
Yeah, you cannot write down to them.
Yeah, no,
They will
it won't
know.
work. Like
It's
they'll
blood
know
in the
immediately.
water. You're dead before you start. Okay. Oh, Haley Wells asks, do you have any YA horror that if readers love your book, any read-alikes that you think that they should also check out?
I don't know if it's classified exactly as horror, but the themes are similar. Gone Wolf by Amber McBride. I would say if you like The Getaway, definitely read Amber's book.
I would say Dread Nation by Sheena Ireland, which I think was part of this last year or the year before. Super cool book, similar time period, zombies, just a really great book. And so if you like Devils, you'll love that.
I'm more in line with monster horror, so any kind of ghost story or monster story, I really like, and I also really, excuse me, liked She Is a Haunting, which is more of like a ghost house type situation, and I think can pull on some similar, like going into a place that is clearly haunted.
Okay, just to note along those lines, there are 4 read-alikes suggested for each of these books in the Summer Scares guide. So be sure to download that guide and just go through it. It's fantastic. They've done a fantastic job this year, as they have done every year, but this year is particularly good. Okay, so I would like to wrap up this panel just with one fun question for each of you that just I want to know. If you could pair your book with a viewing of a horror movie or TV show, what do you think would pair the best? You know, it's like wine and cheese, your book and something. And also feel free to tell viewers what your favorite movie theater snack is.
Well, my favorite snack is gummy bears. But if I can get sour, that's even better. And the movie I would pair with The Getaway, just because of themes, I would say Wes Craven's The People Under the Stairs. It's sort of like if Carla Country was a house instead of a resort.
I see that. I see that. Emma?
I love a large popcorn. I love popcorn so much. I eat it so often. And I would go with probably my favorite zombie movie, which is 28 Days Later.
Yeah. Are you excited for
Oh my God. So excited.
the new one? That promo they put out, like
The
that
trailer
is
is
how
so
you
good.
do a
I'm
teaser.
so excited.
That is how you do a teaser, friends.
Okay.
Everybody just needs to check out.
I've
just
watched it
Google
so many
that.
times.
Yeah.
I will be
So
I will be there
unsettling.
opening night.
So unsettling. Grab the popcorn, like just throw it in the air because that's what's going to happen. Kristen?
Sorry, having trouble with my button too. I also am a big fan of movie theater buttered popcorn. Delightful. I also like it with Reese's Pieces, kind of mix that up.
Tip.
So I'm going to go back a little ways and say that if you like the friendship dynamics of struggling friends, then a good pairing would be I Know What You Did Last Summer. Uh, but then for the younger crowd, I also want to give like an extra shout out to say that there is a show on Netflix called Oni, which is about different yokai and different Oni, and it's a delightful mix of all of the different Japanese characters, Tengu and Kappa, and all of those wonderful characters. So a lot of those make appearance in a darker way in Find Him Where You Left Him Dead, but for the purpose of sharing popcorn and Reese's, I would watch both of those.
Wow, awesome. I had never heard of that before, so thank
Oh,
you for
it's so
sharing
good.
that.
It's
It's
so
so
good.
easy to miss stuff on Netflix now. There's just so much stuff that just streams and, they release it and they don't do anything for it. So I've
Yeah.
never heard of that. I will
Yeah,
have to check that out.
you would love it. It's so good. It's so good.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. It has been so much fun talking about horror with you all. That is about as much time as we have today. Tomorrow, all attendees will receive an email containing links to today's video recording, Summer Scares resources, and a certificate of completion. For more about Booklist webinars, be sure to visit booklistonline.com/webinars, where you can view archives of past webinars and register for more webinars. And don't forget to register for the Summer Scares Adult Panel, which is happening on Monday, March 24th. You can sign up right on the Booklist site. Okay, thank you so much for joining us for today's webinar. One more enormous thank you to the panelists, Emma, Lamar, Kristen. Your books are fantastic. I'm so excited for more readers to get their hands on them. And thank you for helping us celebrate the Summer Scares program.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.